The Blair transformation of the British state was astonishing in its breadth, and it's been very successful. This is not the same country. The country has been radically changed. The results have been, frankly, disgusting. People are angry about it, and they're correct to be angry about it. You sow the wind, and you reap the whirlwind.
What is very striking is the absence of a clear political voice at the moment for the majority.
I think we'll look back at this period when we try to write up the history of the 21st century civil war in Britain, and we'll think that we were already in it by 2026.
Hello and welcome to David Starkey Talks, and me, David Starkey, is talking to another David, Professor David Betz of the very distinguished Department of War Studies at King's College. And I remember much of my academic career was spent on the other side of the Strand to you in LSE, where I'm afraid we were uncouth enough to refer to you as Strand Poly, but these are ancient bitternesses. David, you obviously have a very wide reputation in the whole area of war studies, but you've come to this terrible thing which we can call online prominence recently because of your, I think prediction is the wrong word, but you're saying that there are characteristics in modern Britain that give, I think you've calculated it, roughly a 1 in 5 chance of civil war in the reasonably near future. Do I put that broadly correctly?
Yes, that's fair to say. People are always attracted to numbers, and they like to hear a number thrown at them, and it makes them feel confident that the person that they're speaking to has some credibility, and I like to feel that I do, but I'm really more of a qualitative social scientist. So let's say my opinion is that there is a very strong likelihood, and I have felt this for some time. I think we're actually accelerating towards a civil rupture. There is a branch of the literature on civil wars on which I've drawn, which is more explicit and more inclined to come up with numbers. That's where I drew the figure you mentioned is from a book by an American scholar named Barbara Walter, who wrote a book called Civil Wars, How They Start and How to Stop Them, if I remember correctly, which was mainly focused on the American case, contemporary American case, and also making the point that this was a country that exhibited many, if not all, of the generally understood conditions of...
So this country being America or Britain?
That being America. And so it was at the end of her book where she remarks that on the basis of her analysis of a range of countries, that where the conditions exist for civil war, the chances of one actually occurring in any given year is about 4%. So if you look forward over a period of years, say 5 years, which was what I was doing, then statistically you get to a number that's something around 18%, given the way statistics work. Or given the way probability works, so that's simply where the number comes from. Though I think I think that's actually rather optimistic.
Can we just pause there for 1 second? Because as somebody who is not hugely well informed in America, but has lived there on and off for quite long stretches, a very obvious point of difference strikes me. America, like France to a different extent, is a country where political violence is effectively established. There is a right to bear arms under the Constitution, which is vigorously used. There is that tradition of the Civil War itself. There is interracial violence in a way which I think surely is radically different from Britain. You've only got to look at the kind of police forces on either side of the Atlantic. One aggressive, heavily armed, the other still, however fragilely, preserving the inheritance of the civilian police force of Sir Robert Peel. So doesn't the extent to which violence is institutionalized and legitimated play a very important part? And wouldn't that distinguish us, even now, from America or France?
I think that's true. I think there's a strong distinction between European countries and the United States, for the reasons that you mentioned. And to that, I would add, I think that the United States has more. I think it has more kind of intrinsic health remaining in its political system. I think it has more potential to recover itself. That will be painful, undoubtedly. We can see that occurring on the streets. But it doesn't seem quite, it isn't a political culture which is so inert, which is so apathetic, and which has so fully, in which the elite has so fully and completely embraced national decline, as have European elites, which seem to have given up on governing.
In other words, this is the enormous difference, isn't it, between somebody like Keir Starmer, whose essential approach to everything is to try to do something and then stop, with Trump, with that extraordinary facility, his monarchical instinct, whatever one thinks about it. There is in the American political system at least a reserve of energy that can actually do something, whether one approves of it or not.
I think that's correct. I would say that, at least from my perspective as a distant observer of the United States and somewhat closer to the British case, of course, that the difference is, I think, that Trump genuinely wants to save his country, whereas I don't think that Starmer and his advisors, the people close to him, in fact, generally speaking, our national political class is very ironically named because they're all very post-national in their orientation.
Or indeed anti-national, you could say, couldn't you?
Yeah. I think that is fair. That is fair to say. I mean, I generally say post-national. I don't want to load it too heavily, but the bottom line, I think, is that the United States, for better or worse, has a national leader who does think in national terms, who has an apprehension of the national interest. He may be a country club sentimentalist and very awkward individual in many, many ways, but unlike our own elite, which is, I think, just fundamentally managerial and post-national in its orientation, and they don't really see the erasure of this Britain as a cultural historical entity as being terribly, being any sort of tragedy.
On the contrary, they rather embrace it, don't they? I mean, the whole, rebanding of Britain under Tony Blair, cool Britannia, a new country, was in fact, with a great deal of academic connivance, an attempt at the erasure of history, to say we are starting afresh into a brave new wonderful world of the Equality Act, of the Human Rights Act, the elevation of judges above politicians. So one of the things that you are focusing on is the view, which I suppose is some of it the work of David Goodhart, some of it Matt Goodwin, this whole idea of our political elites having abandoned the centrality of the nation state and the fact that the first duty of a politician is to his own country, and instead, through international law in particular, you see this embrace of every country but your own. So you would see that as one of the central, in other words, the abdication of national politics by our political institutions, by our political leaders, you would see as one of the fundamental preconditions for this idea of civil strife?
Yes, I do, because from the perspective of the rest of the population, to use David Goodhart's frame,
The somewhere.
from the perspective of the somewheres, this is a gigantic betrayal. They look at the country and they say, this is a broken country. And almost everyone acknowledges this. I mean, on left and right, there's a subtitle of however many national reports has this term, broken Britain. So there's really not much controversy in the suggestion that this is a very seriously politically, socially, economically ill country. And it feels to people that it is broken, and that makes them wonder why. Why was it broken? Why was this done?
Who broke it?
And
who are the
yes,
guilty
right.
men?
So I think people apprehend that the country is broken, and I think they have a fair idea of who broke it. But I personally
Would you like to name names?
I think you just did moments ago. You talked about the Blair transformation of the British state was astonishing in its breadth, and it's been very successful. This is not the same country, and I've lived in Britain since 1998, and I recall very. And I feel that, in my own personal experience, it's massively transformed in that period. And of course, the Blair government, the Blairite establishment, which continued after Blair, of course.
Because the Tories, again, let's be fair or unfair to both sides. David Cameron explicitly saw himself as the heir to Blair. He says quite explicitly he wants a Conservative Party where Liberals will be at home. Theresa May continues the whole of the net zero agenda and intensifies it. Similarly, non-crime hate incidents. In other words, we've had, and I think it's a problem, David, I find myself shrinking when you start sounding like an online conspiracy theorist, but we really have had post-Blair, a uniparty government that has simply prolonged the Blair episode, that has left major figures from the Blair years in power, that you had a Conservative government giving the chairmanship of English Nature to a Labour cabinet minister, to Chris Smith. We've just had scenes of Theresa May and Yvette Cooper sitting girlishly giggling at each other. We have a former Conservative Attorney General advising the government on how to outlaw Islamophobia, or whatever turn of phrase we've now done. So there is this very broad sense of a complete political establishment being. And again, it's important to use the word and knowing what we're using with the word, implying the phrase, the guilty men is, of course, the title of Michael Foot's book on the appeasers, those who prevented, or he argued, had prevented rearmament, those who'd appeased Hitler, were looking to a peace on their build-up to the Second World War. So what we're talking about are the domestic appeasers, those who are appeasing. Now, there's another word that's creeping into the air, isn't it? The enemy. Wars have two sides. Who is the other side?
I think there are three sides in this. One, ultimately, what will emerge. We've just spoken of two of them, which are essentially a large fraction and a small fraction of the native population of Britain. The somewheres, those people, right? Native Britons who remain national thinking, remain rooted in their land, in their language, in their culture, and their elite, which has abandoned those things. And that abandonment and the effects of it is what gives rise to such frequent utterances nowadays when people talk about having been betrayed, for example. Betrayal is just an enormously powerful word.
It echoes treason, doesn't it? It echoes the idea of treason.
Yes, it's very, very powerful language, and when a civil society, I think, starts to use these terms because they feel them deeply, that is a extremely strong signal of conflict. The country has been radically changed. The results have been, frankly, disgusting, and people are angry about it, and they're correct to be angry about it. Consequences will follow from this. You sow the wind, and you reap the whirlwind.
So can I just be a little clearer? When you say it's radically changed, are you talking, I mean, we could be talking about lots of things. We could be talking about deindustrialization. We could be talking about urban decay. We could be talking about the rise of worklessness and unemployment, or we could be talking about what I think is the principal focus, and I think we both agree with Confucius that the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their proper names. The proper name is the greatest wave of immigration that the British Isles have ever seen, dwarfing by factors of hundreds, if not thousands, anything seen before. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You're entirely right, and everybody understands this too. I mean, there are many small betrayals. You've mentioned those. I mean, the deindustrialization being a key one, but without doubt, the most significant betrayal is on migration, and both parties have done this. Both parties had something around 14 to 17 years in power, in which both ran migration policies where we had net migration of 200,000 a year. Of course, currently it's considerably more than that, and this is despite the fact that if you look at the election manifestos of the Conservative and Labour parties from 1945 onward, you will not find them saying, well, we're going to have mass migration. If migration was talked about at all, it was talked about in the terms of managing migration in a sensible way as required to serve a high-functioning, high-knowledge economy, and so on and so forth. And
except Blair, can we again?
Except
if you
Blair,
remember,
yes,
there's that famous quotation from the insider. His name has gone out of my head at the moment. That it was about rubbing the face of the British people in diversity, isn't it? So there was a degree of understanding within the government, within in fact, this was the heart of Downing Street, what they were doing, but carefully not communicated, of course.
Yeah, there are occasional instances in the last few decades where you've had these kind of brief flashes of honesty, and that was one of them. The person, I believe it was Andrew Nether, who was
correct.
An advisor to Blair, and of course, subsequent to that, did his best to try to convince people that he meant something different than the actual words that had been said. But the bottom line is, yes, you're entirely correct. The issue is, above all, it is migration. And this goes back to your earlier question about who are the belligerents. So you've got the anywheres and the somewheres. And I think the conflict in that case looks something basically like a peasant rebellion under 21st century conditions. It's a situation in which the people are seeking to punish their elite for having changed the rules of the game in some way that's invidious to them.
Can we just, again, forgive me, because I think it's really important if at each stage we try and look at the specific examples. Would we see there being two components of this revolt, as you describe it, a political one and a street one? The political one, I take it, is the extraordinary rejection of the Conservative Party at the last election and the corresponding collapse in Labour's polling within 18 months of that loveless landslide. So in one sense, the people have spoken very clearly within the political process. But the problem is, of course, that the political process, which was supposed to deliver change in last year, delivered no change whatever, and in fact an intensification because of the uniparty and the ultra commitment of Keir Starmer. I mean, Starmer is everything you talk about as an anywhere, isn't he? He is the complete, concentrated, kind of dregs of the alembic of Blairism. This kind of stinking product of concentrated internationalism, concentrated anti-Britishness, to the extent, again, his record as a lawyer in advising any convenient terrorist, be it Irish or Syrian or Afghanistani or whatever, against the British. So there's a political component, but how were the riots, for example, of last summer? They had many of the symptoms. The Southport riots of last summer. They did have many of the symptoms of a peasants' revolt, don't they? A Tommy Robinson march.
I think that's true. I would locate the political revolt, or revolt in inverted commas, the very distinct message from the somewheres as delivered through the ballot box as the Brexit vote. Above all, I mean, everything after that was subsidiary, and the response it was the government or the establishment response to the Brexit revolt, which did, I think, colossal damage to the perception of legitimacy of the system. To ask people for democratically validated instruction on an issue of enormous national importance, to receive that instruction and then to spend years trying to sabotage and subvert it is effectively something the equivalent of dragging. It's just it was very destructive of the government legitimacy, or of the whole kind of perception of legitimacy of the political system.
They spat in the face of the people who'd elected them, didn't they?
Yes, effectively.
I mean, there is. I'm sorry. I'm using much more physical language than you're doing. I mean, you're using the proper abstraction of academic analysis, but the way it was felt. I mean, the site again. Let's name names. Particularly the people like Dominic Grieve, the Speaker of the House of Commons. The sheer contempt that was exhibited. It is a spitting in the face. It is these little people who did not understand their own good. We, superior by our intelligence, we, superior by our knowledge, have to guide them. And okay, well, it was only advisory, wasn't it? Although, in fact, Cameron had said that he would abide by its verdict. And it was, I'm trying to think what would be a direct, and it is in fact, even if you look back to the days of absolute, well, we never had absolute monarchy, but even if you look back to my kind of period of history, it's very difficult to see a moment at which a government offers a particular promise, a quasi-compact, and then defies it so completely. And it is, I just agree with you completely.
It's frankly astonishing, and so that's really where, and that is also where, in terms of my own sort of academic trajectory with respect to this subject, it starts in that period. Before that, I'd been studying wars in hot and dusty places abroad, not and was probably one of those who was somewhat comfortable in the assumption that these kinds of wars, these kinds of conflicts are afflictions of other people, not of us. And,
comfortable Britain, yes.
Right, and so my views on that began substantially to alter around then, which is when I began writing on this particular topic. The other thing I would add, though, is yes, I mean, it's, you say spit in the face. I think that's pretty fair way to put it. But in light of that, I think people have revisited in their heads a whole range of things which have been done to them now in that context. And one I think is probably the most significant. Sometimes maybe you do this also as a historian, but sometimes I try to imagine myself as a historian 50 years from now, thinking back to the present. And I think, well, how would a historian look at this? When would they think was the vaunted turning point? When do they shift from chapter 1 to chapter 2, and so on and so forth? And to me, a really significant moment was that in 2011, when clearly intoxicated young, I think he was probably attached to Tommy Robinson's group, but young guy was interviewed, went on to YouTube, and he was talking about Islamic ray guns. And of course, he had a horrible accent, but he wasn't talking about Islamic ray guns. He was talking about Muslim rape gangs. He was talking about parallel systems of governance that had emerged across parts of the country that, for the most part, our national establishment, our chattering classes, don't know about and don't care. So this
never even visited.
Never visited. They don't know. I mean, they haven't the faintest idea what's going on in some like ex-pit villages around Durham or something. Well, I mean, they may know Durham very well. That's a wonderful place, but just go 5 miles outside, they don't know it. And this guy was made a fool of, pilloried, and now you look back at that and say, wait a second. In the light of the revelations around the industrial scale activities of Pakistani community-based sexual torture networks in this country, how dare they have laughed that off? So I think we're going to start. I think the thing is, when it comes to it, I think we'll look back at this period when we try to write up the history of the 21st century civil war in Britain, and we'll think that we were already in it by 2026. The watershed, the tipping point had occurred previously. No one's going to start. There's, just as, historians of the American Civil War don't pick up the story on page 1 with the bombardment of Fort Sumter. There's, that might have been when the first shot was fired, but that's not when the story begins. And the story of our 21st century Civil War starts at a point which we have already passed.
Let's just take then as a pickup. We agreed that one of the signs of the popular revolt of the white working class, the white somewheres, was the Southport riots. Let's look at one of the reactions to the Southport riots in the Pakistani communities that you talked about. If we go to one of these places that the political class doesn't go to, which are the suburbs of Birmingham, was famously recorded because Jess Phillipson was actually there. And there was this extraordinary scene. She's the MP for the area. You will remember there was an extraordinary scene between a Muslim police officer and a large gang of Muslims wearing black black clothes, many of them masked and carrying clubs and sticks and baseball bats. And they were going to sort out a pub that they thought was the haunt of this white working class that you talked about. What happened, if we look, of course, at how the Southport rioters were treated by the police, the extraordinary aggression, the deliberate speeding up of judicial process against them, what happened with this gang of actually armed Muslims was, I'm sure you know the incident, chaps, we don't want any trouble, do we? We don't want to attack you. You don't want to attack us. Why don't you go home and put your weapons back in the mosque? Now, that is, and so many things that you can pull out of that. The complicity of a large part of what should be the machinery of law and order in the early stages of civil war, and the other, those Pakistani communities, some members of which, too many, were complicit in the rape gangs, but now as a community defending itself, seeing itself as separate and entitled to arm against a section of the native population. Now, presumably, so far, that must be the clearest instinct of the point I made when I said that there have got to be two sides in a civil war, and yours that there is a third party alongside the divided white native population of the tiny group of somewheres and the much larger group of anywheres. We do have this group now, don't we?
Yes, undoubtedly, and I think your example is probably the best of many available. Although recent headlines concerning essentially the manipulation of the West Midlands Police and the continuing almost seemingly permanent pause now in the sentencing of the two thugs who beat up armed police in Manchester Airport, almost 2 years ago now.
Exactly.
And what these are indicative of is government fear, government and police fear of a reality that they're not quite prepared to own up to publicly, which is that the Muslim population in the UK is quite organized, right? You see with that incident, a relatively small community able to put 200 or 300 guys onto the street, armed within 12 hours, I think, something, half a day basically. This requires a degree of organization, of networking, and so I would say that they are already actually quite well organized compared to.
Can we just forgive me? Can we go further? Because the work, I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Patrick Nash in that marvelous book and its various appendices of learned articles on Islam and English law, looking at the fact that you have not simply an organization, you've transported the entire clan structure of Pakistani Muslim society with its own methods of justice, its own notions of law, its own, forgive me again, its own self-imposed social disciplines, and its own values, all held together by that profoundest of familial ties, cousin marriage. So we have, in that sense, you have both an ethnic and a religious group, which are, forgive me, distinct and proud of their distinction, that have all the features of a sort of sub-nation. If you have your own law, if you have your own family structure, if you have your own basis of a kind of disciplining structure, if you have the imams of the mosque acting as religious and community leaders. Again, this extraordinary phrase, David, you will be familiar. When the police find one of these situations, they invariably talk about, we are going to address our community leaders. But of course, white people don't have community leaders.
Well, I think you've put your finger on exactly the important point here. We could go on agreeing on the matter of the difficulty or of what is represented by the situation you describe of a parallel legal, cultural, and economic system in many of these places. The local economies also work in a rather separate way. We could go on agreeing on that point, but it probably wouldn't be very interesting. I think we need to get to the point that one of the inevitabilities of the triumph of identity politics is that eventually this kind of third rail of British politics, which is about the denial of British indigeneity, would also crack. And I think that's to me what is increasingly obvious since Southport, and particularly with things like with the Raise the Flag movement and the like. Now you have people saying, look, essentially acting as though they understand that we do not have a democratic system. What we have is a kind of imperial system that operates within the confines of a formerly national democracy, where essentially, if you do not behave as a group in pursuit of your group interests, you'll just simply be dispossessed. You'll be preyed on. I mean, quite literally, in the case of these working class, many thousands of working class girls, literally preyed on. And so I think what is occurring now is an inevitable transformation of the native British, I think actually principally English consciousness, frankly, and that has huge consequences, because once the dominant majority in a in a fractured, highly polarized, multicultural, chaotic mess begins to think in the same terms as all of other groups, then you're in a naturally conflictual situation. It becomes a very zero-sum game. It becomes about who has the power to seize control and basically take the whole pie for themselves. That's why this situation is quite is so perilous, because it's not just that the country is fractured. It's actually fractured in a particular way, in a uniquely particular way, where there is a dominant majority which feels, for very obvious reasons, and correctly, that it is being downgraded, displaced, it is losing its countries,
two-tier policing,
all of this. And that is happening very, very quickly, and that then fuels a sense of urgency to do things, to act, fundamentally to act out.
Can I just pause there? Because one thing seems to me to be very striking, and you made the point already, that whole sections of the state machinery, be it the Labour Party, be it local government, be it the police, be it the welfare system, have become fully involved in the Muslim enterprise, haven't they? In other words, that you have a section of the state which, again, we use those terrible phrases at the beginning, the enemy of the people, those who have betrayed. What is very striking is the absence of a clear political voice at the moment for the majority. I mean, you mentioned Tommy Robinson. Even Nigel Farage has pulled back from anything like, again, anything like the forceful statements in defence of minorities that we've heard from Starmer and all the rest of it on the left. So there's still a huge space on the right in terms of a national politics, isn't there? Do you see somebody stepping into that? And do you think that's the next step, that Farage finds himself pushed aside and a clearer, more forceful, dare I use the word again, more ethnically based politician emerges? Because that surely would be the logic of what you're talking about, wouldn't it?
Logically, yes, that is what I think will occur. From our understanding of how societies work and how they fall apart, I mean, I think that's a very sort of straightforward prediction that proceeds from fairly standard understandings of mass psychology, for one thing. Who that might be, I don't know. I don't see such a person on the horizon. I think many people now have invested a lot of hope in the idea that Farage might be such a person, but that seems an increasingly implausible thesis at this point, and that too is very worrisome, because what it creates is again a feeling of defeated expectation that it is again a huge propellant towards conflict, when people sense that they were asked and they were denied. They chose, but those choices were discarded. They asked for leadership and they received none. And ultimately, where does that go? I think I believe it leads to a situation where they're prepared to contemplate figures who are radically outside the status quo. That seems so. I do wonder in Britain, will we make it to the next election? Let's say we do, but you get a reform government that hasn't the wherewithal, or probably doesn't have the desire to act in accordance with what urgency requires. Doesn't have the wherewithal, and even if it did have the wherewithal, would probably be resisted by the bureaucratic state.
I'm sure that's true. But I think there is something that we really ought to talk about and give ourselves a little time to talk about. Namely, we are going to have a test of exactly what we're talking about in the forthcoming by-election in Gorton and Denton. Because there you have, juxtaposed to each other within the same community, which is an area very much, I suppose I really am very much an anywhere, but an anywhere dangerously somewhere tendencies. But my family comes from Oldham and Rochdale, so I'm very familiar. I wasn't born there, I was born in the Lake District, but I'm very familiar with the area. My mother even lived in Denton Lane. And there you've got, in Denton, you've got the old white working class. On the other hand, in Gorton, you've got two groups. You've got very powerful Pakistani communities, but you've also got their principal allies in the university-educated elites. Large numbers of students, university teachers have moved into these areas. And of course, together, those two groups, as it were, the junior anywheres, the would-be anywheres, the trainee elite, and the Muslim, the Pakistani groups, have formed this bizarre alliance held together by their mutual hatred of Israel, although they agree on nothing else. And they've found a leader in Zach Polanski and the Green Party, who are prepared to use much more extreme language even than Keir Starmer. We don't yet have a Green Party candidate, though it may very well be Polanski himself. But we do have, of course, Matt Goodwin, who is within the Reform group, the one who's used the language which comes nearest to that populist language of any, he's now, I suppose we should call him, a mainstream political figure. He's an endorsed party candidate. So how do you see that election, that by-election, playing out against the background which you've talked about?
I think I can answer the spirit of the question. And say that I don't think it matters, because I don't think that the political system can cure itself. People think that this election matters because if Matt Goodwin is elected, say, that might suggest that there is more kind of political capital remaining in the national tank than is thought. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think it really matters. I don't think that there is... Most of the things we've been talking about for the last 47 minutes are deep structural, and they're not going to be shifted. This is the Titanic, and it's aimed at an iceberg, and we've got... You can stick a paddle over the edge, but it's not shifting fast enough. Our political system is not going to be able to maneuver quickly enough to resolve, I think, the issues that are accelerating. How would I put it? Our political system is moving at the speed of a London bus, and the problems which exist in our society that are leading it towards fracture are accelerating at the speed of a Formula One car or a jet airplane. And that's so for this or that event in the political calendar, I have the feeling that there isn't actually that much consequence in them. No doubt it will fill the pages of our mainstream newspapers, and people will be all over X, and undoubtedly I also will have some kind of opinion on it. But really, if we take an objective step back and look at the situation in some historical perspective and informed by our understanding of the condition of society and how societies work, then I don't think it matters. Polanski doesn't matter. Goodwin doesn't matter. Starmer doesn't matter.
I think that is a marvelously dying echo, maybe marking the dying society. Rather sad, it's gone on so long, been so wonderful. We will pause there. David, I'm immensely grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.